that it also, the funding goes towards. But the purpose of this grant is to reduce systemic barriers to employment. How do we look at systems? How do we bring together the unusual suspects in a collaborative way to talk about systemic barriers to employment? And I'll give you a couple of examples of what a systemic barrier to employment might be. It could be previous incarceration. It could be that there is no public transportation in your community. It could be that there's no place to live because there's no housing. So there could be a lot of different things that could be a systemic barrier. It could also be that the field that you might go into doesn't pay well enough for you to make a living, so you're not training in that field. And then there are fewer training programs because people aren't taking that training program, and suddenly we don't have any childcare, and then everybody can't go to work. So there are lots of different ways the system can throw up barriers to people being in the economy. We had a summit in November with a lot of community leaders from around the county, pretty much every corner of the county. And the areas they chose as the focus for us, and by leaders, very broadly speaking, it was open to, we had obviously the librarians who are the leaders of our communities, and then everyone on down from there. And the focus areas that they chose were communication between employers and other people, especially helpers and human services, but the building long-standing sustainable connections with businesses and employers. They chose communications around resources. So we do have a resource page. The United Way has a resource page. And if you can allow sharing screen, I bet Clarissa would be happy to throw up the resource page. So we have, the United Way maintains a resource page with every resource in the county that we are redoing to be more user-friendly, because it couldn't possibly be less user-friendly because we worked with what there was. So we're redoing that page for it to be really searchable. And then we also send out a newsletter every week. So there's a number of ways we're creating digital communications with community leaders, and a lot of our helpers use this resource page when they're working with folks. This is really, really useful, but it doesn't provide enough support for community members who perhaps are not comfortable. Clarissa, could you click on healthcare and dental, please? Just an example of the kinds, if she can scroll down, this is the kind of thing that the resource page provides. But if you're somebody who's not comfortable using the internet to find resources, you may look elsewhere and need to have a resource navigator who is available to help you figure out, how do you get your childcare benefits? What do you do if you can't find housing? Where can you find inexpensive eyeglasses, etc.? Clarissa, you can stop sharing screen. Thank you. So what we're looking to do is find a way to sustainably fund the communications that are resources for the community, but also to sustainably fund a navigator who would travel around to the various community centers, and by that I mean libraries, but other places as well, to be available to community members to navigate the system. So that was the second area of focus. The first being relationships with employers, which I'll come back to in a second. The second being resource navigation. The third area of focus that was chosen was housing. And I think we all know that housing can be a significant challenge in the county. And so we have a housing work group that's built of a lot of people who aren't usually together in the same room talking about housing. And if I could plug to everybody on this call, there's an amazing event coming out of the housing work group, which is this Wednesday. All of the faith partners are working together to do an Easter Passover teach-in on housing and homelessness. And it's an amazing, amazing lineup of folks. Lucy's not on this call, but Lucy Rogers will be speaking at it, but there's a number of really amazing speakers who are going to be presenting. And it is, as Reverend Devon says, it's a call to action that housing is a moral imperative. and that we need to figure out how to house people. But it's also an economic imperative. If people can't afford to live the places where they can get to jobs, they can't be in jobs. So those are the three areas. However, there's a couple of other areas that touch everything. One is racial equity. If we're only hiring from a certain racial pool of people, because there are certain racial pools who do not feel comfortable being here, that limits our ability to engage people in the economy. Another area that touches absolutely everything is I've always said there's two things you talk about in rural Vermont. You talk about housing and transportation, unless you talk about transportation and housing. So transportation touches everything. And we're doing a number of things, including some studies of the gaps to try to figure out how to fill them. And an example of why transportation can be so complicated. So one of the ways we're working to build a sustainable system with our employers is around recovery-friendly workplaces, so that if you are in recovery, you can be in a job that supports you being in the job. And it's very exciting to some of our employers. Places like Smugs and Copley are super excited about this opportunity because they're having a hard time hiring. But if you get into a job and you live in Johnson and you get hired at Smugs, and this happened, and you don't have transportation, your job might fall through a few times. Your transportation might fall through a few times. And if you're in recovery, that may be enough to push you out of the workplace. And being in employment is incredibly important if you're in recovery. So the exciting news on that front is that Working Fields is actually a hiring agency that works around the state with businesses. And they got their eye on Lamoille County. So far, their only client is Butternut Mountain Farms, but we've been introducing them around the county to employers who are really excited to have them come in because they provide full supports for people who are in recovery or formerly incarcerated. The last area that I'm going to talk about, and there's a lot more to cover, but I don't want to take up the whole day. The last area I'm going to talk about that we're doing for communications between employers and other folks is we are looking to launch something called Working Bridges, which 2 United Ways have in the state of Vermont. And we're looking to launch this through our United Way, because what the Working Communities Challenge does is it looks for ways to create new systems that are sustainable when the grant is over, bringing in working fields, increasing transportation options, finding a way to have a rural resource navigator, creating long-term sustainable support for our housing partners, things like that. Working Bridges would live with United Way. And it's an amazing program because it's a fee for service for the employers, where a navigator goes into your manufacturing plant 3 hours a week. You pay a certain amount a year. 3 hours a week, this navigator goes in and works with your employees to navigate the system while they're at work. And this helps people stay in jobs. People are not quitting jobs if they can't find transportation, because this navigator knows that Capstone has a program to help you buy this car for $6,000 and can help you with financial literacy training to save the money to get that car so you can keep going to work. So a navigator like this being pushed into workplaces is incredibly valuable for workplaces. And it is almost a financially sustainable program once you launch it. There are parts of it, there are some parts that are backbone functions that are coming out of things like trainings, data collection, that kind of work that doesn't get covered by the employers. And so we're looking for other ways to fund that. And we're talking about, can that go into the state budget so that the whole state has that covered, right? So that all of the state can have these Working Bridges programs that pay for themselves except for this tiny little piece. So that is a big, heavy lift with United Way that we're looking to do, but I think it's going to be an incredibly valuable thing to the county when we get to that point. I've left off about 400 things, but I tried to hit the major points. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for just keeping the ship going when I just disappeared. I'm actually really glad it went the way that it did, because I thought that when I accidentally left, that everyone was forced to leave. So I'm glad that this kept on rolling. Emily, thank you for that information. And I want to just open it up. I will just say quickly, I've said this before, when we have community folks come in and speak, I find it really helpful personally. And I also just think it's a helpful sort of picture of how, you know, we're working on like state level and how the community, you know, work is happening and how these things sort of intersect what it looks like on the ground. So I really appreciate the work that Working Communities Challenge is doing. Anyone have any questions for Emily? And I know there's someone here on a phone, so I just want to say, if you're on a phone, you can hit *9 to raise your virtual hand, and you can, if you're called on, can hit *6 to mute and unmute. Anyone with a question for Emily or about Working Communities Challenge? Yeah, Judy, did you have a?
Yeah, I'm excited about the Wednesday evening event. And maybe, Emily, you could just say where it is, the timing, and I understand it's on Zoom, I think, too, so people can attend it virtually. But John and I aren't able to attend it. We are feeling so bad about it. So do you know if it's going to be recorded?
Okay, so I don't know if it's going to be recorded. You were the second person to ask me that. I'm putting the link in the chat here. The in-person is at JCOGS, the Jewish Community of Greater Stowe. But you can sign up on that link right there to attend virtually. I will say the in-person folks have it lucky because the church ladies are making desserts. So I would try to come in person if you can. I've requested the cream cheese little bits. But the virtual will also be lovely. I don't know if they're recording. And what I'm going to do is, since you're the second person to ask me that, I will check in with the various clergy members. I think Rabbi David is running the technical part, and ask him if it's going to be recorded. And I assume that Kate has your contact information, so I will get that information to Kate. I'll also put my contact information in the chat in case anyone wants to reach me with any questions.
Thank you. And Emily, do you mind also, I'm saving the chat, and but do you mind whenever you jump off this, just also maybe shooting me an email with your contact info and that link as well, and I can put it out to the email list that goes to this meeting.
That would be great. Yep. And I'll wait to send that to you till I hear back on whether it's going to be recorded. And Rabbi David does not check his email on Saturdays, so I will not send that to you till tomorrow.
Sounds good. Thank you. Any other questions about Working Communities Challenge or anything they got going on? Emily is an amazing resource, and I'm always happy to follow up with her if you guys have more questions or anything. And Emily, you know, welcome to stick around if you feel like, you know, being part of the conversation. Also, more than happy to take the rest of your Saturday morning.
I appreciate not having to read 87-page bills, so I'll stick around and listen.
So on that note, we are coming to sort of straight off of what they, I guess, call crossover season. They call it like crossover week. That is a misnomer. It is not 1 week. It is a couple of weeks, and it makes for very, very long days. And I forgot my glasses, so I can't hide the like bags under my eyes right now, but you'll have to excuse me. I can't speak for others if my brain is a little slow. But I'll do my best to facilitate here and answer questions you have. I think given the time, well, I'm gonna pass it off to Dan and Senator Westman. And if you guys have any really pressing things you wanna make sure you say about committee work and stuff right now, that's great. And then I think, you know, we can just open it up to question and answer and kind of go from there. But Dan, you wanna?
Sure, thanks, Kate. Thank you, Emily, for your talking about the work that you've been working on. Definitely good stuff. So thank you. I'll let you know in obvious, Kate was just talking about crossover. So the last couple of weeks, we've been a lot of bills that have come out of committee in the House go to the floor. So you're on the floor until it's a lot more floor debate, less committee work in these last couple of weeks. So, but in committee, we also took up a bunch of bills. We've been working on an opioid response, looking at some holes in the opioid response, the fact that there's been 180 opioid deaths this last year. So mostly around fentanyl and the amount of fentanyl that's ending up in out available for people who are have opioid use disorder, end up using fentanyl. So we talked a lot about prior authorization for Medicaid. So people who are seeking treatment, the treatment is a lot more seamless between their doctors and the pharmacy. We also looked at the opioid settlement. Vermont is going to be getting a lot of money from this opioid settlement, and we had to set up the infrastructure behind the scenes for how that money gets distributed out to communities and out to the agencies that will be meeting the requirements of the settlement. So these are recovery centers and treatment facilities, but it has to go through a board, and we had to set up those boards and commissions and who's going to be on it. We passed a pretty good bill about really looking at individuals with developmental disabilities, and many of these individuals are living with their parents, and their parents are getting older, and how and where are they going to live in the future? We put together kind of a couple of pilot projects that we want to see how they'll work out. Teresa Wood from Waterbury was very much really working hard on that. So I could go through anything from there. We did some changes to Reach Up, and then basically 2 bills that I've been working on. You've probably heard me talking about kind of all the time, which are the Office of the Child, Youth and Family Advocate. The Senate Health and Welfare has been taking testimony on that in the last couple of weeks. So that's really good. I've been following that. And then H-153, which is home and community-based providers, looking at the reimbursement rates and actually trying to figure out what it costs to deliver services to older Vermonters and individuals with disabilities. In the budget that we just passed yesterday, there was a 7% increase for home and community-based providers. So that will help out with staffing issues when we look at what it costs now to deliver those services. A lot has changed since COVID. So, finding someone to go into people's homes and provide in-home care for older Vermonters is not happening at $12 an hour or $12.50 an hour. So we'll be seeing how that advances, that funding bill. So that's gone over to the Senate, or it will on Tuesday or Wednesday. We still have to have 3rd reading on it. So anyways, I'll just leave it at that. Glad to answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Senator Westman, you want to give a little update before
Sure.
we do Q&A?
So my morning committee's natural resources, and just to give people an idea, crossover is the very middle of the session. If you have a House bill and it didn't come out of its committee and get to a money committee by a week ago yesterday, it's dead. If it's a Senate bill and it's in the Senate and the policy committee didn't vote it out by a week ago yesterday, it's dead. If it gets voted out, it has another week if it has money attached to it, where the Finance Committee in the Senate or the Appropriations Committee in the Senate would send it out. So my afternoon committee appropriations spent all this week going through all the bills that had come from other committees that had money on it, going through every single one. We must have had 25 bills that we went through. We had one afternoon where we had 8 bills in 2.5 hours, and to get your head around everything is really hard. So we're still in the position in Senate Appropriations where we're taking testimony on this year's budget, or this next year's budget, the budget that will start July 1st. And we're going through all of the departments around that. We expect the House will have their budget over to us in about a week. It has been voted out of House Appropriations, is coming to the floor. That's a process that will take all of this week for them to do that. My morning committee is, as I said, was Natural Resources. We've started working on House bills. We started working on the bottle bill expansion. And if anybody wants to know about that, we can talk about that. There's a bill that we've got that is about surface water withdrawal and reporting surface water withdrawal to the Natural Resources Agency. A little bit that from farmers to golf courses to everything except ski areas. We have very little knowledge of what is being withdrawn out of rivers, lakes, ponds, streams, and they're trying to set up a process. We heard a lot from people that have small vegetable farmers. So anyways, those are a couple of the issues in natural resources that we're working on.
Cool, thank you. I am gonna forego sort of launching into Judiciary Committee-based stuff and just leave it open. Like if anyone here has specific questions about any of the content in my committee, I'm happy to talk more about it. I just really wanna make sure we have time for question and answer if people are coming with things they wanna chat about. And I'm gonna start with well, it might have been before we went live, Judy was asking a question about redistricting. And so maybe just starting there with that conversation and giving an update on where things stand. I can start with just super brief update from our district, Lamoille 2, as it stands right now, would remain intact. There would be no change. The district that we are in is right sized. Much of Lamoille County was. There is some shift happening in the Stowe area where they saw the bulk of growth, and minimal changes there. Well, I say minimal to people who live in these areas. It probably doesn't feel minimal. There's a small expanse of Stowe that will be moved into the Morrisville district for the House side, and I will defer, Senator Westman, don't want to put you on the spot, but if you don't mind maybe giving a little bit of an update on where the Senate map is, and if other people have more specific questions about redistricting in the House, feel free to raise your hand and ask that, but I'll pass it on to Senator Westman to talk about the Senate map.
So let me start by saying this is a very hard conversation to have. If you, a perfect Senate district is 21,400 and change. I think it's either 432 or 436, but it's in the 21,430 some odd people. And the US federal courts have never approved a redistricting that had more than an overall deviation of 10% up or 10% down. They more than likely like the smallest district and the biggest district to be within 16 to 17 percentage points of each. The Senate just put together a map that had deviations of 14%. That means above the perfect number and below the perfect number, the gap in the widest. And I'm giving you all this background because there are 3 counties in the state where the Senate districts grew by more than 10%. Chittenden County was 15.5% over the perfect number for their district. Franklin was 13.5, and Lamoille was 13.5. Every other Senate district in the state lost population. So the difficulty for Lamoille County is that the smallest district in the state was Essex Orleans, who lost population. So our north and east, because Wolcott has for the last 40 years been in a district with Essex Orleans, and I might say not very happy in the Essex Orleans district. They felt it's been very clear Wolcott has felt disenfranchised. So Essex Orleans is the smallest district. They're 10% low, and Chittenden County and Franklin County to our west is way above, bulging at the seams in population as we are. So Lamoille County has about 26,000 people. A perfect district is 21,400. So we had to lose in population someplace between 4,000 and 5,000 people to get to a place where we are within the legal limits that the federal courts would approve. I hate it. There's no town in Lamoille County that doesn't feel like they are centered here. We have very good services here. We have home health agencies that work very well. We have a family center that is very active around the county. We have a United Way that we hear that's working. We have Lamoille Health Partners. We, and we basically have 2 supervisory school district unions. We're a unit, but we can't stay together. And so I specifically did not want to go on the reapportionment committee because that committee was going to have to pick which towns are in and out of the district of the 10 towns in the county. And that's a no-win situation. How can I say Belvedere or Waterville or Eden or Wolcott or Elmore is out because their population equals about 4,000, or Stowe is out? There was the reapportionment board put together a map that had Cambridge and Johnson out. It was an untenable situation. My only coaching to the reapportionment committee was, whatever you did, take people out of the county as a block. They put together one map. Senator Perchlik from Washington County, who was on the committee, put together one map. At the only time I lost it, taking Belvedere in Waterville and putting them in Franklin County, putting Wolcott in Essex Orleans County, putting Elmore in Washington County. And from my point of view, what that does is takes very small towns and totally disenfranchises them. I think Linda Martin is on the thing. I think Linda had said to me at one point, it was either Linda or someone from Wolcott had said to me that in the last 20 years, they've had one senator from at the Essex Orleans district visit one town meeting in Wolcott. And that makes places feel disenfranchised. So my coaching to them was, you either take 4 or 5 of my small towns and send them to the same district, or you pick one of the larger towns and move them. The ultimate result was yesterday, the Senate voted on a reapportionment map that has 9 towns in Lamoille County together and move Stowe into the Washington County Senate district, which I hate, but legally there's nothing else to do because we have to drop that much population or the federal courts will strike down our plan. And Washington was short of population. And I really believe that unless you take either a group of towns together or one larger town together, that those voices of those people would be lost. And this is a no-win situation. I'm sorry to report that all of Lamoille County is together. They did take Fletcher and put as a small town in Franklin County because Franklin County is bulging at the seams. And to be able to put a district together for Franklin County, they shoved Franklin County into Lamoille. They shoved Fairfax with 5,000 people in the southern end of Franklin County into Chittenden County. And so, and that was all to make the numbers work. The overall deviation in our plan is 14%. The bill was voted through the Senate. As I said yesterday, it was an amendment to the House reapportionment bill, and the bill is now off to the governor.
Thank you for that update. These are really hard conversations to have, and in the House side, those bulk of those really hard conversations are happening down south. And yeah, there's a lot at stake in these decisions. Bill, did you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Along the lines of voting and so forth. Yeah, I can see this redistricting thing being rather emotionally charged, but what got me going is there was a political ad in Front Porch Forum about ranked choice voting. And in my research, to me, it's kind of like a game of 3-card Molly or the shell game. And it seems to be very convoluted. And I had the audacity to say that it was fishy. And lo and behold, Front Porch Forum censored me and they deactivated my account. So I just wanted to know what your position is on ranked choice voting.
I'm happy to offer an initial response. Sorry to hear that about Front Porch Forum. And I wonder if it's possible to reach out to the moderators there and see if it's possible to get reactivated. But my understanding, and Dan and Rich can help me out, is that there has been a bill that was introduced to look at ranked choice voting, and it didn't go anywhere in the legislature at this point. So, this isn't something that's being urgently pursued on the state level at this moment in time. It looks like Clarissa has some information about this as well. I'll let Dan and Rich speak to it, but I think it's not an attempt to dodge the question. Like everything else in the legislative world, I feel like I don't know nearly enough about it to give you my position on it. I'd need to really, dig into whatever bills are in front of us and the testimony that comes around it. But Dan and Rich, I don't know if you have any responses before Clarissa. I'm happy to let you fill us in on how it works.
Sure. I mean, I'd be glad to try to answer that. I haven't really followed it that much, but I did ask someone how it worked. And I know that one committee took testimony on it like the Friday of crossover, and that was it. So basically what I think it is, when there's a candidates running more than two, if no one gets a majority, then well, first of all, when you're voting, you pick your first choice, your second choice, your third choice. I don't even know how many choices. Don't know enough about it like that. But, and then if the candidate that you picked as your first choice doesn't get enough votes, then they go to your second choice. And again, I don't know enough about it to say how I would feel about that. It didn't even really take any testimony. And I know that there was, if you read the campaign finance reports, there was some money spent on advertising. We saw ads on TV, we saw Front Porch Forum. I forget which lobbying firm was hired. I don't even know where the money came from, but it's listed in their campaign finance reports. I don't know if that's helpful, but
Well,
it's
what
nothing that
annoyed,
made it happen.
what annoyed me is the fact that they're running a political campaign on Front Porch Forum. And just to question it, I got censored.
Private. Front Porch Forum is private. They can do what they want.
Okay.
They, just saying.
So is Twitter and Google.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what part of what, oh, sorry, Senator Westman, go ahead.
no, go ahead if you got something to say, Kate, and then I would like to. Well, what I would say is, most importantly for me, are Vermont elections fair? And you know, every state in the country has to do some audits of the number of people that are, you know, trying to vote twice or trying to do that. So our Secretary of State's office audits elections. They pick out 7 towns after each election and compare as other places in the, and they compile all that information at the federal level to check and see. And Vermont ends up as one of the 2 states in the country. I think we came in second this time in the safest elections in the country. And for me, yeah, that I've seen it maybe, and we might be third, but we're toward the top of the country. And our elections are mostly fair. And I think something to be quite proud of. I'm not, I'm not, I know very little about ranked choice voting. It really, bills have set in both the Senate GovOps committee and the House GovOps committee, and they haven't really moved. You know, as I said to you, there's lots of issues going on. If they ever move, I'll pay more attention. But I think the most important thing for us to do is make sure that our elections are as safe and as well run as they can be. And I think Vermont has a pretty good record on that. And that's the first thing that I'm worried about.
I agree.
Thank you. And there's a question in the chat, just because people are referencing this data. They asked, what was do we know what states were ahead of Vermont in the, like, sort of?
You know, I think William held up what I think is that report. You know, we had the Secretary of State's office in for their budget pieces about 2 weeks ago. And the Secretary of State was reporting the results of that. And, you know, and he's quite proud of Vermont and what a good story we have. And, but I think for me, that's the most important thing. Do people in Vermont have confidence in the system we have here? And I think, you know, what the statistics show is we do. And we should be proud of that. You know, if we change the system, I'm not opposed to changing the system. I just would need to understand it more. But I think for me, the first thing is, do we have confidence?
Yeah. Anne Marie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. My connection is unstable, and I wasn't able to hear when Rich said what was going to be the solution to the reapportionment, what that actually said. Just that one line was gone. What can I ask for a repeat of that?
The repeat of it is 9 of the 10 towns in the county are together, and Stowe was sent to Washington County.
Thank you for repeating that.
I'm not seeing any little virtual hands up. We'll just give it a moment. Does anybody have any questions? They were coming here to chat about. Oh, a lot of activity in the chat today. This is not usual. Give me a second to just see what Someone's asking if I would like to, if I could talk about the committee. Yes. Okay, so I'm happy to talk about my some of the work that we've done on the Judiciary Committee. The next question is about universal school meals. I can just really quickly say on that, and then maybe we can circle back to it if there's a more in-depth question. We just passed a bill out of the House yesterday, maybe, that included funding for universal school meals continuing in Vermont. So the House has committed to that policy decision, and it'll now go to the Senate, and we'll sort of see where it goes from here. In terms of the Judiciary Committee work, it looks like you were specifically curious to know about some of the firearm safety legislation that has moved through. Is that what you were wondering about? Yeah, and I'll do my best to talk about it. And I'm also more than happy to find time to talk individually, because there are elements of the bills that are kind of specific and I don't have the language right in front of me. So if there's like technical questions that you have, I'm happy to dig into that further. So in terms of firearm safety, the legislation that the Judiciary Committee worked on this year was originally S30. And S30 was made up of a number of different components. And most of, like, I would say actually, I think all of the components that were in S30 are pieces of policy related to gun safety that had sort of worked through the House at different times. So for example, there was a section of S30 related to relief from abuse orders and how the court treats access to firearms when someone is the subject of a relief from abuse order. We actually did that piece of policy last year, and it passed through the House last year, but it didn't complete its way through the process. Similarly, no firearms in hospitals, that worked its way through the Senate, I believe, the year before, and hadn't worked its way through the House. So nothing that was in S30 was necessarily new. What happened was it all kind of got put into one bill with the idea that there had been sort of a lot of testimony taken in all these areas, and there was general sort of agreement. I think the one sticking point in S30, which ultimately led to the governor's veto, was that there was an effort to adjust the length of time that a person has to pass a background check. So in current Vermont law, we have what you call a default proceed, which is that if somebody applies, if someone wants to purchase a firearm and they have to go through a background check, that's a federal entity that does that background check. And currently they had 3 days to complete that background check. And if the background check did not come through within 3 days, it was a default proceed, which would mean then the person could come and purchase the firearm, basically, if they didn't pass that background check. And what we heard in testimony was some folks have referred to this as the Charleston loophole. I think that that's a contentious phrase, so I'm not going to use that phrase, but just to say that if people are talking about it, this is part of what we're talking about. So in taking testimony on that particular area of policy, what came through very loud and clear was that the majority, in folks who are going through processes related to domestic violence incidents, are sort of disproportionately affected in terms of slowing down their ability to move through background checks. And so what the research has found is that there's actually there's a pretty concerning percentage of people that don't have their background check completed within 3 days that ultimately would not pass the background check. And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but there was a number of firearms that have been sold in Vermont that ultimately law enforcement had to go and attempt to relinquish because they should not have passed the background check. So originally we made that 30 days. As 30 got vetoed, the governor was very clear that he was not comfortable with 30 days and would essentially only sign legislation that moved it to 7 days, 7 business days. And so in an effort of compromise, the House passed S4, which is includes all the elements I described, including this adjustment to the waiting period, which is now 7 business days. I'm going to pause here for a moment. Carl, I don't know if you have specific questions about any elements of that, though. Go ahead.
I do. For a lot of us, well, my background is in corrections, and for a lot of us, our biggest concern has been about gun violence, specifically domestic violence. When you peel away the out-of-state gun incidents or persons involved from out of state in gunplay, and you take away suicides, that's the next, the potential lethality with a gun in a domestic dynamic is very concerning. And I think that's one of the, in my opinion, personal opinion, and from what I've read, and from what I see in my workplace, that seems to be one of the most concerning issues when it comes to gun safety and public safety. Yes, I mean, just the odds and the statistics of gun violence occurring during those situations. And I was a little concerned that everything got lumped together when that is such a key issue. So I guess my question is, what are the chances of that piece of, or that bill going through with that one component really being addressed? Because we're not seeing a lot of that. We're not seeing, you see an RFA get issued, and we're just not seeing the guns being taken out of the situation. And that's anecdotal, but very concerning for us and everyone.
Yeah,
I mean, as
thank you.
a citizen or a professional, it's just very concerning.
100%. And I think that the two areas you talked about in terms of suicide and domestic violence are absolutely the two top policy areas of concern when it comes to gun safety. And so what we did in this bill, which was the part of the component that I talked about that we actually had passed out last year, and then it got moved into this bill, is a step in the direction, which is that we put language. So there's a section of statute that directs judges on sort of what steps they can take when someone is the subject of a relief from abuse order. And so what we did is within that sort of section of statute where it lists what they can do, we included language that clarified, that made it very clear that one of the things that they're able to do is to relinquish firearms for that window of time. This isn't new in the sense that judges always had the discretion to do this. And there are some who said, well, they can already do it. Why would you put it in here? What I've come to learn in my short time in judiciary is that judges pay a lot of attention to the law. They read the law very closely. And one of the things we talk a lot about in Judiciary Committee is they call geographic justice, which is essentially making sure that someone who lives in the Northeast Kingdom receives the same kind of care by the judicial system as someone who lives in Chittenden County, regardless of who your state's attorney is or any of these other political factors. And so this kind of policy that we did with RFAs is something we're trying to do in certain pivotal areas like addressing domestic violence and gun safety, which is let's put the language directly in the law so that every judge who is, receiving a relief from abuse order, it's very clearly stated that this is something that is within their sort of scope of things to do. So, there's a lot more that we can be doing. And I think I would love to continue to talk to you more outside of the space about areas that you think could be effective in addressing this. But right now, this was sort of the step that we are taking. And this was included in the bill that just passed. So this will get voted out, and then that will become we have the governor's assurance that that will then become law.
He signed it
So again,
yesterday.
I'll pause. Oh, well, there we go.
He signed it yesterday.
Oh, good, good.
So I don't know if that was too much in the weeds, but Carl, I'm happy to, I'd love to, keep the conversation going outside of this space to hear more about your experience and look at areas that we might be able to make some more inroads. I know it's 9:55. Any other final questions, things people want addressed?
Rich,
Mhm.
Rich, were you in support of S30 or against?
I voted for S30 as it finally went through the piece that I was the piece about carrying guns on hospital premises, and that it was a central piece of the bill. I don't think with as many people coming to hospitals, and I'll just use an example. Our mental health agency now is a lockdown facility. You walk into Lamoille County Mental Health, the doors are locked, and if someone is in trouble, they send them to the emergency room. And the idea of the 13 hospitals in the state, it not being against the law to take a gun into an emergency room, I find, for me, I think it's inappropriate to take a gun to an emergency room.
Are there armed guards in those facilities?
Actually, here's the problem. Up until 2 years ago at our hospital, we had a contract with the sheriff's office to provide armed guards in that. 2 years ago, the Department of Mental Health with the federal government came in and said that those armed guards are not trained well enough to handle mental health patients. So they forced all the hospitals to end the contracts with the deputy sheriff's office. So many of the hospitals are either without enforcement, or they've had to contract with very expensive outside contracts. And for me, 7 of our 13 hospitals, all the community hospitals, this past year lost money. And so I've got the community hospitals in the state are in financial distress. And so it's this push me, pull you in all of that. And I quite frankly thought that if we didn't have a better alternative to the sheriff's office having a deputy there, the state should have found a way to left it alone or trained the deputies better or something. There is literally, for most hospitals in the state now, a crisis in their emergency room. I would say to you, Copley Hospital, for the first time in its history in the last 2 months, turned people away at the door at their emergency room. The Medical Center Hospital in Burlington now has turned away people at least 5 times in the last 3 months at their door. We've got calls at Copley to take emergency room patients from Northwest Medical because they were at capacity. We're shoving all of our problems on to our hospitals at their emergency room door. And we have to find a better way than that.
I'm gonna jump in on that note, as it is exactly 10 o'clock. And I want to let everyone be free on their Saturday morning. As always, thank you guys so much for joining us. I really enjoy these opportunities to hear from you all and what's on your mind. And Dan and Rich, I don't know if you want to say your goodbyes.
Well, thank you, everybody. And, you know, you can always reach out to me, give me an email or a call. I'm glad to talk to you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.